Welcome to this discussion about the proposed coal and steel development in Makadu, Limpopo. There's been some discussion on the ground and in the media, but a big question for activists has been whether this is just a scam or a real threat. So in this discussion, we'll look at this mega project in two ways. One, to make it clear that there is not enough water for it, and question why the water aspects are so poorly planned. And two, to look at whether it is really likely to happen. Fresh water is scarce on our blue planet. Of all the water on the planet, only about 3% is fresh water, and of that, 2/3 are locked up in ice on the poles. So only a tiny amount is available. Moreover, South Africa is number 30 on the list of countries with the least water in the world, and in the Limpopo Valley, water is even scarcer. South African rainfall is 465 millimeters per year. The international Limpopo Valley, to the northern part of South Africa, gets between 300 and 700 millimeters per year, which falls in 50 days. The area is hot, so it has a high evaporation potential, which will get worse because of climate change. Catchments help us understand the rivers, the areas around them. It helps us calculate water supply and demand and plan for the allocation of that water. It is also a useful base for citizens' participation in the governance of the water resources closest to them. So what you see on the picture in front of you is the area we're going to spend time talking about, which is the Northern Limpopo Water Management Area. It consists of 6 catchments starting from the west, which is the Mathabatha River, a small dry river which is surrounded mainly by white commercial farms with mostly livestock on them. The second river, the Mokolo, is an area we will discuss in some detail. It starts in the mountains of the Waterberg, which have a relatively high rainfall, is then collected in the Mokolo Dam, and also runs down a river with a large sand aquifer, which is used for irrigation all along right to the main stem Limpopo. It's in this area that the historical development of the Waterberg coal field has led to a water demand that has lasted for more than 50 years. The next is the Lephalala, not to be confused with the name of the town, the Lephalale, for which it's named. Also starting in the high Waterberg Mountains and running down, also having sand aquifer, and also having a large number of irrigation farmers, including the community of Seleka Shongwe on the banks of the river. The next one is the Mogalakwena, which takes the Waterberg water to the east, runs through quite a big area, which has lately increased its water demand as a result of platinum mining. Not visible on the map are the many scattered rural communities who used to be part of the Bantustan Leboa, which is also stretches into the next river, which we will be discussing in some detail, the Sand River, which runs all the way to Musina Beitbridge, where it also meets up with the Limpopo, as all these do. It is in this Sand River catchment that we will also look in detail for our second project. There's large irrigation farming that along the sand aquifers and drawing water from the river. There are large urban settlements here, Polokwane, the Limpopo capital, Makadu, Musina, and others that also have water demands that have put so much pressure on this river that it is fully or in fact over allocated. Then finally, there's a small catchment supported by two rivers to the east, and there are some transfers they basically go with the rest of the area. The Limpopo North Water Management Area at the moment uses more water than it has available, and this is made possible by water transfers, particularly from the most developed side with the biggest urban concentrations. As you can see, those red arrows are existing water transfers that come to Polokwane and industries and communities around it, also to Makhado. But that is not enough. New transfer schemes are also being planned. So this is a sure sign that already this area is under pressure of water scarcity. Looking at the water use of each sector in South Africa, we immediately notice that irrigation takes the lion's share. In a national census illustrated here, 61%, and it goes to irrigation. Domestic use is 27% of the country's water, but it's important to remember that this is really a figure for urban areas, so it includes urban businesses and urban industries. Livestock is quite small. It uses 2%, small but widespread. There's a 3% category for commercial forestry and other invasive alien plant species, because they take the water before it even reaches the rivers or the dams. Mining at 2%, also important here to remember that although it's a small amount, because of its pollution potential, it can pollute a very high proportion of the available water. That figure for one of the worst cases in the upper Olifants, where there are many coal mines, that figure is over 70%. The responsibility for pollution is with the coal mining industry. Then power generation at 2%. It's classified as a strategic user and is the beneficiary of a number of interbasin transfers because it has requirement for very, very pure water. Industry accounts for 3%, but remember there's a section of industry that is counted as part of urban areas. And again, although it has a relatively small water use, it has a big pollution component. The picture looks slightly different in the Limpopo North Water Management Area, where irrigation is just under 70%, where livestock takes 3.5%, livestock including wildlife and tourism. Commercial forestry is quite small at 1%, but the mining industry and power generation already take up 10%. And the question in this research is exactly what happens if the water demand of this sector grows. It is in this water scarce area that there is a proposal for a massive industrial development called the Electro metallurgical special economic zone. It will be situated, if it happens, between Makhado, about halfway between Makhado and Musina in the Sand River catchment. It is supposed to consist of a coal-fired power station, 3,300 or 3,600 megawatt power station, 6 or more steel factories, iron, steel, vanadium, chrome, and various other minerals that are supposed to be worked there. The big question is where the water will come from for this development in an area where the water is already over allocated. The scoping report for this project talks about the possibility of taking water from the Zoe Dam on the Mzingwane River, which is, if you look at this blue spot, the Tuli Karoo Aquifer. It's one of the rivers running across the aquifer, roughly from Bulawayo to Beit Bridge. First, if the full content of this dam is taken, which is 300 million cubic meters, it'll only be enough for the construction phase, as the operational phase talks in the documentation about 123 million cubic meter. Secondly, there are geological problems, particularly that this is a sandy river, so that if you release the water from the dam, it will go into the sandy aquifer, and not all of it, or actually a very small portion of it, will arrive at the Limpopo main stem, which is the boundary with South Africa. So the other possible source and where there is enough water is in fact this Tuli Karoo aquifer. The documentation simply talks about drawing water from the Limpopo River. But if you look closely at the Limpopo River, it is part of this aquifer. So on top you would find the main stem Limpopo River and the tributaries that contribute water to it. You would, inside those rivers and on the edges of these rivers, you have shallow alluvial aquifers between, say, 6 and 20 meters that people who live there make shallow wells into it. And then also a deep sandstone aquifer. All of these are connected, and water flow from some of them into other components. It hasn't been studied to the extent that we can say exactly how these recharges and discharges occur, but we know that it's connected, as you can see in this conceptual model. The Tuli Karoo aquifer spans 3 countries, South Africa, Botswana, and Zimbabwe, but because it connects to the Limpopo River, Mozambique is also involved. There are about 200,000 people who live directly on top of the Tuli Karoo aquifer and use its water resources. They generally, the majority of them are rural dwellers who are poor, majority of female-headed households because the men go to work elsewhere, and they run livestock and do subsistence farming, although a number of them produce for commercial markets, and then there are plans to support further production in that sense. There are also broadly 2 million people who live in catchments and watersheds who are that are related to the Tuli Karoo aquifer. The development of the EMSEZ is strongly driven not only by the Limpopo provincial government, but also by a number of very strong companies from China. China has based much of its recent industrial development on its own coal resources, and there are horrific stories of coal incidents and accidents in these coal mines. Unfortunately, China has a bad record in taking care of its own aquifers. The North China Plain Aquifer is a case in point. It's become an international case study for the extent to which it has been damaged by 3 decades of very rapid and careless economic and industrial development that has both depleted and polluted this aquifer. This is not a good omen for the Tuli Karoo aquifer. This EMSEZ project is a typical example of mega projects. And what we know from history is that they undermine local decision making because they are not comprehensible or controllable by local residents, because they thrive on distant decision-making processes. Mega projects overpromise in terms of benefits like local jobs, They underestimate costs, time it takes to complete, as well as the impact they have on the environment. And mega projects are open to corruption. So what we are looking at is this big fire-powered power station, a number of steel-making, iron and steel-making factories around them. And we know from the South African experience with ISCO, later ArcelorMittal in the Vaal Triangle, what the environmental costs may be. In that case, it included contaminating groundwater, driving local smallholder farmers off their land because they and their livestock got sick and they could no longer produce there, as well as air pollution and very weak compliance and regulation. If the same happens in Makado, it will be a replay of a very familiar nightmare. But it's not only the steel factories. This development is part of an extension of coal mining. You may be familiar with the Vele coal mine struggles near the Mapungubwe historical site, the first city in southern Africa and very important to our history. That same company, first called Coal of Africa, but now called MC Mining, is also planning 4 other mines to directly supply. You can see they surround the site of the special economic zone. Makado has we know it's made a sample pit and erected offices. The others may only be plans. But the point to see here is that these at least 5 coal mines, because there's also Exaros Chikondeni and other mines in the area, will exert pressure on the groundwater, including polluting it and including lowering the water table, so that some communities close to them already experience water problems. For example, the Mutimeli, who live close to the Makado mine and whose wells were affected by the coal sampling operations. To look at how such a nightmare scenario may play out, we turn to another of the 6 catchments in the Limpopo North water management area, the Mokolo, where after 50 years of coal development, a pipeline that is being planned to bring extra and very dirty water onto the Waterberg coal field. The immediate reason for this is that when Eskom got World Bank money, there was a condition that it should install sulfur dioxide scrubbers that need water. And although they got a holiday, a pollution holiday for 6 years, the time is now up and they need to install these scrubbers. The pipeline also is on the back of various hopes for further coal development, independent power stations, as well as extra coal mines. But none of these have come to fruition, and none of them are currently offering to put money on the table for this pipeline. Coal development has already captured all the water that the Mokolo Dam gathers from the high-yielding regions in the Waterberg, in the Waterberg Mountains. A first pipeline has already been built. It's the MQAP1, phase 1, to take all of this, with the ability to take all of this water onto the coal field at Lephalale. But that's still not enough, so another pipeline is being planned from Tabazimbi, Vleepoort, to take the water also to Lephalale. Current plans are about 75 million cubic meters per year. This pipeline is actually the endpoint of a very long artificial river that starts in the Lesotho highlands, where dams take water that would have gone south to the Orange and pours it into a pipeline and then a river which takes it to the Vaal Dam. From the Vaal Dam, this water is taken by Rand Water, purified and distributed, pumped uphill to Johannesburg and Tshwane, where it is then collected after use and gets to the Hartbeespoort Dam. The Hartbeespoort Dam is famous for its intense eutrophication, which is too many nutrients in the water to allow for a healthy water body, the result of many wastewater works, informal settlements, and basically bad management of nutrients in the catchment. It's also infested with the water hyacinth, which is already spread into the Limpopo River because the dam normally releases into the Crocodile River just south of the Mathabatha and also going to the Limpopo. The plan for the pipeline actually involves, for the first half of the journey, to pour the water up to Thabazimbi into the Crocodile itself. So it has serious environmental threats for the Crocodile River, which will have less, which will suddenly receive this influx of more dirty water, for the dam that will have less water to cope with all the nutrients that get poured into it, and then it will go into a pipeline to Lephalale. We are not sure that this will happen because the pipeline has now shrunk to 75 million cubic meters and only have 3 clients left: Department of Water Affairs for urban water, and water for the power station, and water for Exaro. We have to ask at this stage whether the special economic zone is really likely to happen. First, this development, with its 90-year contract with a possible 30-year extension, goes against all climate change response logic and timelines, which require us to have zero coal use by 2050. There's no real investment money on the table. As in many other mega projects, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors about whether the money is actually being paid over. Steel markets are currently unfavorable in South Africa, Southern Africa, and in China. And we know that the Chinese government will withdraw support from mega projects if they are not commercially viable, as happened with the Modderfontein mega city outside Joburg. The Chinese government will also pull out if there is too much diplomatic embarrassment. For example, Botswana is a United States ally that shares the Limpopo River and the Tulikuru aquifer, and may very well object to any plan to withdraw water from the aquifer. And finally, there simply is not enough water, and if the project goes ahead without paying attention to the water aspect, it'll either just fail or it will impose disastrous consequences on other water users. We do, however, know that this project is part of a general Chinese plan to offshore its excess steel capacity, its carbon intensity, and also its water use to South or Southern Africa. And this project may reappear in a different guise somewhere close by. It is being strenuously opposed on the ground by a number of groups that range from affected community groups to the Vembe biosphere and wildlife tourism, as well as irrigation farmers. A large number of categories of people will be at risk if the special economic zone does go ahead. If the zone draws water from the Zoe Dam and the Mzingwane River, it'll make the recovery of Matabeleland commercial irrigation and subsistence farming impossible. This includes the subsistence farmers on the lower end of the river who draw from the shallow aquifers. If there is an attempt to draw water from the Limpopo, it'll threaten the Tulikuru aquifer, as well as the governance of the Limpopo River in Limcom, which is not very strong at the moment. It'll threaten the livelihoods of millions of people on the aquifer and in the Limpopo Valley. If this special economic zone goes ahead without water, it will put extreme pressure on commercial irrigation, residents in cities and towns, ecosystems, wildlife tourism, and above all, rural water users that live spread out in these catchments. A number of important background issues have emerged from this research. The first is the vulnerability and invisibility of rural water users. Although they are the majority of citizens in these areas, their water use is so small that it's regularly disregarded by water planners, and this puts them at immense risk. There's also a need to strengthen citizens' participation in water governance in South and Southern Africa. The Northern Limpopo Water Management Area does not have catchment forums or catchment agencies at the moment. There is a dire need for ecological flows to be applied to sandy alluvial aquifer rivers. That's non-perennial rivers like the Mokolo and the Mzingwane. And there's an urgent need for South Africans to understand the dynamics behind the growing Chinese presence in Africa and its interest in our resources, not only the minerals, but also the water. So thank you very much for listening in and participating in this webinar. And I would urge you to read the report online. There's a link to the report online at the FES website, and I look forward to the questions and discussion. Thank you, Tony Olivier, for the illustrations and the maps and helping us through the visual part of this presentation, and to Richard Worthington at the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung for the idea of this research and the support.